I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And once again, I remind myself how I need to get some Bloodsport merch because I'm being a bad person and not wearing any today. But I am extremely excited to have Seth Schaffer on the show, who is part of Team Bloodsport and also Just Cause Robotics and just, so much in the community. So welcome to the show.
Hey there, yeah, I guess I have to start with the normal intro. Hi there, this is Seth Schaffer from Team Just Cause Robotics. I actually have my own merch now, you can find on my website. So if you're missing Bloodsport merch, at the very least, you can get one of these shirts. This is new. It's actually surprisingly comfortable too. But yeah, I have been doing way too many things for a very long time now, basically. Essentially, right now, I just run my own company full-time, Just Cause Robotics. And that is my day job and my hobby, I guess, for the most part. Which is kind of cool because it means it gives me an excuse to like go to all these events, because every time I go to an event, I get to talk to people, and it gives me a chance to talk about like how I've been working hard to try and get more people into the sport, as well as being a time for me to actually compete and have fun and hang out with all my robot combat friends, which are most of my friends at this point.
Same. So yeah, that's really cool. Now I really want to hear like the story behind making this decision to kind of go all in on that, because there certainly are days where, I'm like, I just wish that I could do this stuff all the time, but it's, realistically, that's a very difficult thing to do. What kind of led you to that decision, and how have you been able to build off of that?
That's a complicated question, but it's a good question. So I guess I should preface this by saying that I am generally a pretty risk averse person. This is definitely one of the larger risks that I've taken in my life, to try and do something completely on my own instead of working for a company. But I am like relatively young as engineers go. I'm 26. I worked as an engineer since right after I graduated college with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering in 2019. So I went to the University of Rochester and graduated in 2019, and then immediately I had a job lined up. So immediately when I graduated, I basically drove out, found an apartment, and then started working within like a week, which was pretty brutal. But the first place that I worked was actually not where I was working when I quit my job to do Just Cause full time. I was working at a laser company called IPG Photonics out in Marlboro, which is actually ironically where Brian Boxall currently lives. But I was never living there. I lived in an adjacent town, and there were a long laundry list of reasons why I left that job, and especially that apartment complex. But I won't get into all of that here because it would take too long. So I had been looking for work for a while. I ended up landing a job at DECA, which is where I was until about 2 months ago. And DECA was really cool. I originally got hired to work on an autonomous delivery robot in partnership with FedEx, but they ended up canceling that project, or not FedEx canceled it, but FedEx stopped funding it. So DECA basically canceled it because they couldn't afford to keep it running. So I ended up bouncing between a few different projects. At my last few months there, my last like 6 months, basically, I was working on, or rather my last 5 months, I guess, was working basically just on one project. And it was medical device stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about because it's super NDA. But it was cool working there. I definitely wouldn't say DECA is like a bad company to work for, especially as an engineer. And I got to work on a whole bunch of totally different wild things, even within one project. Like even just for the delivery robot project, I did everything from learning how to become a plumber to make a rain simulating rig that used like a shower faucet to pretend to rain down on the cameras and sensors to make sure that we had proper weather mitigation systems, to actually designing and 3D printing and prototyping parts that would end up on the actual robots. and everything in between. So it was pretty interesting. And I got to touch a whole lot of different things, but I was also like one member of a big team, whereas now I'm like running a company myself. So I can't say that 100% of the skills were transferable or anything, but it was still a really cool experience. I think it would be silly of me to tell anybody who is looking to graduate college that they should start their own company immediately when they leave. I think learning how to actually do stuff first is a good idea. I don't think that I could get to where I am now without having worked as an engineer for a few years before then, but I mean, there's still like a ton of just me learning how to do everything on my own and figuring things out as I go along and making lots and lots of mistakes along the way. I mean, I still make mistakes every day with what I'm doing now, but you kind of learn as you go.
That is true. With anything that you venture into, but I mean, I think that that's great. There's a lot of, probably 30, 40-year-old people that it would be very daunting for them to think of starting their own company, because that's huge. I'm curious, for people that don't know, tell a little bit more about what Just Cuz does. Like, what is the business?
Yeah, so I think part of what made it less daunting for me was that I didn't do what you just said, basically, that I didn't just like leave my job to start a company, because I actually started Just Cuz Robotics as a YouTube channel back all the way in 2019 when I was still working at IPG. So it was basically in like September of 2019, I think I posted my first ever YouTube video, and it was literally just like the first version of this bot here, like what electronics went into it and how I wired it together. And then I think I might have baked that into like an event recap from my first ever Norwalk Havoc event, which was in August of 2019 or something like that. So it basically just started out as only being a YouTube channel, where I had realized that like because I had been in the Facebook groups for a while. I'd started doing robot combat back in college a couple of years prior to that, in like late 2017. And so I've been in all the Facebook groups and stuff, and people would ask the same questions over and over. So I thought like video content, I watched like tons of YouTube myself, and I did back then as well. I thought video content is like the best way to disseminate this information. So why aren't there more people doing it? And like, yeah, at the time, like Robert Cowan was doing it a little bit, and there were a couple other small channels. Well, maybe not small, but like there were a couple other channels that were doing it to some extent, but maybe not very regularly. Or there was like Team Panic, which is still active doing that sort of stuff, but he's based in Australia and pretty much entirely focused on 3 kilogram beetles, or sorry, 1.5 kilogram beetles or 150-gram ant weights, which aren't really as much of a thing in the US. So I thought it'd be cool for me to get out there and start doing stuff that's like for the US audience about especially beetle weights. Eventually I ended up building a 12-pounder and other stuff, but primarily focused on just beetle weights and like being very general about like, here's the theory, like stuff that I learned in engineering school that's like actually relevant to robot combat and all of that sort of stuff. And so I kind of just did tutorials at first and event recaps as well. And then I think around 2020 to 2021 was around the point I got to like 500. I think it took me like a year probably to get to like 500 subscribers. And then it took me like another year to get to maybe like 2000, something like that. I probably have the timeline really wrong, but the growth was pretty exponential rather than linear at the start. I think that probably is the case for a lot of channels where if you just release content really regularly, because there's like people watch each new thing and then other people randomly discover old stuff and watch the new thing. So you end up like just slowly growing this base of regular viewers at the same time that you have new viewers discovering you. You don't really lose subscribers very often, at least unless you do something terrible. So
yeah, and it's funny like the way that you describe that, because honestly, I think for myself, my journey in, doing a YouTube show and social media has been very similar. I got into it for a lot of the same reasons. I saw a lot of the things in the forums and I'm like, I feel like there's this void that can be filled. And then it kind of went from there. So that's really cool, that you've done that and been able to grow the channel so much. I think it's extremely important for people that are looking to get into combat robotics and know more about it, which is a big reason why, for those that are watching, I'm going to have Seth in a future panel kind of talking about a lot of this stuff, because I just think it's so critical to growing the sport.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I guess more on like turning the YouTube channel into like a business. So the first thing was in 2021, really early in 2021. Like I said, most of my information as to what I would do with robot combat came from just being in like all the forums like Norwalk Havoc and Facebook groups and stuff. I don't think the Norwalk Havoc like Discord existed even back in like early 2021. I'm not sure. If it did, I wasn't a part of it yet. But still in the Facebook groups, like the most common problem that I would see people posting like a video like, oh, my speed controller caught fire, or like I blew up a motor, or like how do I pair this motor with the speed controller? Like pretty much all of the problems that I saw people posting regularly about were electrical. And so I realized that like whenever I'm wiring up a new robot, like you have to connect a battery somehow to a receiver, 3 speed controllers, often, sometimes 5, and a power switch and a power LED sometimes, and a BEC sometimes. And so it's kind of just like this really annoying thing that like everyone has to deal with, and that's really easy to screw up if you're new to it. So the very first like product that I designed, I just spent a few like a month basically on YouTube learning PCB design and taught myself PCB design from scratch. So I didn't learn anything about that in college. I barely learned anything beyond basic circuits in college. Pretty much anything I know about electronics I learned by just building robots. So I had just been doing that since like middle school, high school, when I was in Science Olympiad. And so I knew it better than most people my age, I guess. And so I decided to teach myself PCB design and design a PCB that just did that job of connecting your battery to a switch and a BEC and like 3 XT30 connectors to connect to your speed controllers. And then after that, it kind of ballooned from there to, oh, what other features do people want? I sent like a survey to people, like literally like a Google form out to people, and was like, what other features would people want? Do they want like the LED and the switch and the BEC built in? Oh, okay. It sounds like people actually want that. So I'll make the all-in-one PD board. And then I started selling those. And at first it was like, well, even prior to that, I'd been selling CAD models. I think I sold like CAD model of Division and like some of my Blade models for like $3 or $5 a piece or something. And I wasn't really making any real money from doing that, but I was making a hell of a lot more than I was making from YouTube, because I don't even know if my channel was monetized at that time. And even once my channel got monetized, when you have like 1,000 subscribers, you make like $3 a month from like AdSense. Like you get no money. So it was like every time somebody buys a Blade CAD model, it's like, oh my god, I made like $2 after transaction fees. That's way more than I paid from YouTube from releasing a video. But when I was selling these like PD boards, like all of a sudden I'm making like tens of dollars at a time instead of twos of dollars at a time, which is still nothing in the grand scheme of things, but it's like way more. And so I kept expanding my product line of power distribution boards. I think the point at which things really started to take off was when I came up with the idea for the Dartbox motors, because there were so many brushless motors on the market, and brushless beetle weight drive motors on the market, and that seemed like a pretty crowded space. But all of the brushed motors on the market kind of sucked. I mean, like bot kits is probably the only exception because they're like super durable, but the actual motor power you get out of them is like a tiny fraction of what you can get out of like the 1806 motors that all of the brushless options at the time were running in like late 2021. So, or sorry, early 2021, I think it was. So 2021, I basically came up with like, can I just like buy a bunch of Nerf motors and buy a bunch of Chinese AliExpress gearboxes and just combine them together? Surely this is a scalable and easy to do thing that I won't hate myself for choosing to do 100 times or anything. So I just bought a bunch of motors. I bought a bunch of gearboxes, like both completely just off the shelf, no customization whatsoever. I like made a 3D printed and laser cut metal jig to cut the shafts of the motors and grind them to the exact length you needed to press the pinions on. Pressed all the pinions on by hand with an arbor press. Mated them to gearboxes with like I just bought like a $60 electric screwdriver so I didn't give myself carpal tunnel, because literally every single motor that I assembled, I have to undo 4 screws that are like M2 tiny screws, then add 2 screws to mount the motor to the plate, and then redo 4 screws. So if you're doing 100 of these, that means you're undoing or inserting screws like 800 times or 1,000 times. So I was going to not give myself carpal tunnel by using an electric screwdriver, it would still took forever though. So I was doing that for a while with Dartbox version 1, and those were selling surprisingly well. I think I compared to just selling PD boards, I made like 10 times as much money in the same period of time selling drive motors. But it was unbelievably laborious to do that. So I eventually was like, all right. Or actually, first thing that happened was that AliExpress just stopped selling the gearbox that I was using. So I was already like, oh crap, I'm going to be totally screwed if I don't find a new solution to this. So I spent like a solid 2 or 3 months learning how to basically be a supply chain master and sourcing gearboxes and motors in China for them to combine them in China for like a fully assembled, like it just arrives to my door and then I can ship it to a customer solution. And that became Dartbox V2. And since then it's just been a slow burn of like, what other products do I think people need? Is it like a wheel hub that mates to my motors? Is it like a speed controller that pairs with them well? And how do I add to my product stack to support that? And so basically all of 2022 was like building out my product lines and trying to support Dartbox motors as like my primary thing. And then it was very, very late in 2022, I started designing SSP, like shameless self-promotion, just the single robot. I kind of always had it in the back of my head that it would be good for it to be a kit, because there's this big hole in the market. Like nobody makes a Beetle weight kit besides the D2 kit that you can drive around in your house safely, that you can hand to a 5-year-old and not worry about them killing themselves with it. And the D2 kit's not Norwalk legal because it doesn't have an active weapon. So the entire idea behind the SSP was, how do I make a mass manufacturable robot that is, I can sell it for less than $500. Ideally, it was going to be less than $400, but I basically was like, if I can't do it for under $500, I think nobody will buy it. And then it has to actually be good. It has to be relatively cheap to maintain, aka bot kits wheels that cost $26 a pair, not going to happen. And ideally you shouldn't have to replace huge pieces of it every fight. And then it also needs to minimize 3D printing to the greatest extent possible, because I already knew from the start, like if you have to 3D print a Beetle weight chassis, it's going to take like 10 or 12 hours. So if I had to ship 10 of them in a week, then it's like impossible to do that, you know? So I went with the machined billet chassis, partly because it's way better and more durable, and also partly because it's scalable. A lot of the design of SSP is just designed to be as scalable as possible. Unfortunately, there are limits to that, because actually packing the kits is right now my biggest bottleneck that I'm trying to solve, because there's still like 45 unique parts that go into every single SSP kit. But I got to this point where I had a robot design that like seemed okay in like January of 2023, and then I brought it to Norwalk, and the rest is basically history. I got like 30 orders within a month, and then I scrambled to try and actually fulfill those for the next couple months, and now I'm at a point where I actually have a surplus of parts and I could actually ship kits like within a week if people ordered them, and I've shipped more than 50 of them in total so far.
That is really awesome. I mean, I think, especially with the massive growth that we're seeing in combat robotics, especially at the lower weight class levels, because of the accessibility that these kits really give people a great jumping off point if they don't have that background and experience. So I think it's so essential to have these options out there.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think so. Like, I think basically right now, if you're looking to get into robot combat, it's basically between a Viper kit and an SSP kit for what's the best like starter robot. That's kind of where I wanted it to be. Eventually, I want the SSP to be a little bit more like the Viper in that it has like first party weapon modules that you can attach to it, but I just haven't gotten around to doing that just yet. But it's something I have plans for. Because the thing that I really like about the Viper kit is like back like 2, 3, 4 years ago, if you'd show up to like a local B2 competition that wasn't Norwalk, like half the competitors would be D2 kits because it was the simplest robot that you could just buy. And like there weren't that many other kits on the market. Now there's quite a few more. They all have weapons now, other than the D2 still. And all of them except SSP are spinners, but you can still like buy a robot and bring it to a competition and show and like whatever, right? But we've gotten to a point where Norwalk has basically made the Beetle circuit go completely nuts. And the vast majority of robots that exist are not D2 kits, not even close. And so there's like a ton of really, really competitive robots. And we're at a point where I think if a D2 kit shows up at a random local competition, it'll just get mulched pretty consistently. So now I needed to make SSP like way more durable than that for it to actually be competitive. And I didn't realize that it would actually be good at first because I kind of just assumed because it's a control bot, I'll still just like lose most of my fights. But right now, I think at Norwalk, SSP has like, I think it's like 8-2 or something. Like, and I went to Bot Brawl and I went 6-2. So right now it's like the 33rd highest ranked Beetle out of like 600 Beetles in the official rankings, something crazy like that at Norwalk. And it's been doing pretty well just because I can kind of drive well, I guess, and it doesn't die like almost ever. And I've been doing lots of improvements. Every competition that I go to, I make improvements to SSP, and almost all of those improvements get rolled into the kits that are getting shipped as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now I'm curious with like all of this business stuff, finding time to fit in doing BattleBot stuff and all of that. How does that work for you? Because it's definitely, it sounds like you're very busy.
Yeah, that's very true. I am definitely pretty busy. I think it kind of comes in waves. It's like whenever I get a restock of a thing that's really popular, or I get a ton of orders, or like if I make a video that like SSP is doing well, I'll get like a ton of orders, right? And so it becomes really hectic for like a month, and then it peers off a little bit. Right now, I'm thankfully in a bit of a valley, but it's been too inconsistent for me to give you like a real answer to that question, I guess. I think for the most part, basically, I force myself to spend time doing things that aren't robots some time of the day, whether it's spending time with my girlfriend or just like taking care of things I need to do, like chores around the house and whatnot. And going to competitions, as weird as it sounds, like, because I've basically made robot combat like my life, I still find like competing itself to be enough of a hobby that it's still fun rather than it being like part of my job and therefore boring and not exciting. And like as much as there are, I think like Adam Savage once said, like, even if you're doing like your dream job, like 90% of what you do is going to be like pointless drudgery, no matter what job you're doing. It's pretty accurate. Like there's a lot of just like dealing with stock numbers and like making sure that I don't sell out of something, or just like packing orders and all that stuff. There's a lot of repetitive, simple tasks in any job, but I feel like I'm actually contributing to something that I really believe in. Whereas working for somebody else, that's not going to guaranteed be the case all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely feel that. So yeah, and then the other thing that I was, curious about was just to get your take in general is, especially as somebody who, you know, has a kit and, has done a lot of designing, to see what you thought about World Championship 7. Obviously, like, Bloodsport had some ups and downs in there, but
Yeah.
I thought it was just such a great season, and such an interesting way of things playing out, to have these different robot designs do so well. I'm just really curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Bloodsport going into this new season was pretty much a ground up redesign. We kept like a few things the same, like the wheels were basically the same size, so we had the same basic chassis shape, but it was like brand new chassis, brand new head, brand new weapon system. We kept the drive motors and gearboxes. Basically the drivetrain was like the same, but like everything around it was different speed controllers, different voltage on the drive. We made it faster. So everything was a bit experimental. We didn't really know what to expect going into it, and we learned very early on in our first fight that we had a catastrophic design failure, and we had to adapt on the fly to it, as every BattleBots team basically does during the competition. So yeah, seeing these meta breaking designs do really well, I think gives me a bit of hope for Bloodsport as well, because it's like everybody would think like, oh, if you're gonna fight like a horizontal, you just put a wedge on and then you win, right? But while we did lose to Beta because they have like the best wedge and the best driving and like are just like super on top of it all the time, we didn't really have a good answer to them. Like we were able to take out Rotator even though they have a big wedge, because our weapon hits so hard now. We were able to cleave through it. Like we cleaved through like solid quarter-inch AR 500 with our blade, which is nuts. So I think there's always going to be some X factor that gives you a hole in what is the meta design, whether it is just having a slightly harder steel weapon, or having this like crazy insert thing like whatever the heck double tap was trying to do, or having your weapon on an articulating arm like Saw Blaze, or to an extent Tantrum, um, or just being huge, right? Like there are always going to be these things that do really, really well against some percentage of the field. Like huge, I think, could handily beat like 70% of the field even 2 seasons ago, but like they were never fed the robots that they could actually fight. They were fed like deep six and like uppercut. And it's like, okay, what are you gonna do with that, right? I think that pretty much any robot, given enough really well matched opponents, could win the giant nut. Especially last season was just such a stacked competitive field to begin with. But it's clear that like Sawblaze is a cut above the rest. Like I don't want to take anything away from JMO. Like he obsesses over that robot. JMO is an incredible designer, incredible driver, and he knows every single detail about that robot, and he has made every single tweak possible over every season to make it as good as it can be, and experimenting with Megatron along the way to make as many of those changes as possible in a 30-pound prototype them there, because you just simply can't get enough time in the box with heavyweights for it to actually be possible to iterate fast enough to like win, I think.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring thing that I hear, but it's a fact. I mean, and unless you somehow have access to a box big enough for a heavyweight, it's pretty hard to do. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, like you're right, like Bloodsport is a different kind of design, and even horizontals, I think at this point, because there's so many verticals, horizontals are kind of like in the minority in types of bots, but I'm really hoping that makes a resurgence. I mean, I think that evidenced by what Malice was able to do this past season really shows that that's still a relevant type of design.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I don't think anybody would like honestly say that they think Malice is like the most powerful horizontal spinner in the field either. Like, and they're still able to like break Minotaur's weapon bearings or whatever it was. So I think there's definitely promise for horizontals. I think that the combination of having an actual ground game and like an actually fast and controllable drive is one of the things that puts Bloodsport apart from a bot like Tombstone. Because like I think it's clear that the 360-degree weapon thing helps to make some of those trade-offs that you have with the horizontal a little bit easier to swallow. But it comes at a big cost. The biggest cost for us is just our weapon needs to be so long that fighting vertical spinners becomes really hard. We've tried everything possible to prevent our bars from just like breaking or bending. We still haven't quite solved that problem, just because the weapon has to be so long. Malice solves that problem by just having a tiny weapon, but then you can hit them basically anywhere on their robot, whereas for us you can't really hit Bloodsport anywhere directly.
Yes, that is very true. Well, I mean, I will be very curious to see, down the line, because I know the last time when I spoke to Nick, he was talking about working on some things. So, we'll see what happens with Bloodsport in the future on that. And then of course, I think the SSP kit is great. I obviously hope that you have a lot of continued success with that, and that it continues to grow as more people become aware of the sport. I mean, NHRL and the Today Show, that's huge.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So I just, I think it's wonderful, and I hope to see more and more of this in the mainstream to get more people aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Norwalk is doing, or National Havoc, whatever, is doing everything that they can do right now. I think they're doing everything right to get robot combat in front of more eyes. And they're doing a great job of that. I don't know that purely doing it on TikTok and YouTube Shorts was necessarily going to be like the be all end all, but like getting on the Today Show, getting on Picks, definitely is where there are people that have never heard of this sport before, right? And I mean, yeah, to an extent, also TikTok and YouTube have that as well. But I think that you see a lot of recurring views from the same people. Like, even if your video gets viewed like a million times and then your next video gets viewed a million times, it's not seen by 2 million people. It's probably seen by like 1.2 million people, right?
Yes, that is true. But yeah, I hope that it continues to grow, and like I say this on every show, but for real, if you're watching, keep supporting combat robotics, and if you're new to it, start supporting combat robotics, because it's a really cool thing, and it's such an amazing community, and I want to continue to see it grow.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing that National Havoc Robot League is doing right now is they're showing the world that BattleBots, the TV show, is not the be all end all of combat robotics. There's a lot more that combat robotics can be, and it can include a heck of a lot more people the way that they're doing it. When you have a robot that costs $500 and you can just show up and fight 6 times a year, 7 times a year, 10 times a year when they start to expand, depending on where you're located, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing. I remember just like before Norwalk was even around, like there were no real competitions anywhere near the Boston area where I live now. It's kind of crazy. Like, you have to drive like 300 miles to get to like Motorama. That was pretty much where I went in early 2020 and 2019 as well. But the field has changed dramatically because Norwalk not only hosting just more competitions a year than anywhere else, but also like they're such a huge competitor draw that people are actually willing to fly. I think they said somewhere, I forget, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I thought they said somewhere at one point that like 50% of the competitors were flying to get to Norwalk, which is just unheard of for any other competition, really.
Yeah, that is very true. I was willing to do it, and I'm going to do it again. So I enjoyed myself that much the first time. But yeah, so just everybody keep, watching, like, subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed to Just Cause Robotics, please make sure that you do that as well. I'm sure that's a lot of amazing content there, and just, keep watching, and we'll see everybody next time on the show.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me.